3 frightening Bigfoot stories. I was fishing alone on the Deschutes River in Oregon when I encountered something that shook me to my core. It was late in the afternoon and the fish had stopped biting, so I sat on a log at the edge of the water. A meadow on the opposite side of the river was full of wildflowers and high grass, and just beyond the meadow was the edge of a dark forest. I noticed a young buck feeding on the grass. He was a good-sized deer, with 2 points on one antler and 3 on the other. I've always been comfortable in the wilderness and prefer to do things on my own. I was about a 3-mile hike from my car, and there was no sign of anyone else around. Then I saw a change in the deer's behavior. He seemed nervous, stretching his neck to see above the grass, and turning those big ears to pick up any sign of a threat. The deer turned his head towards the trees, and I think we both saw it at the same time. It was crouched low, right where the shadows of the forest border on the meadow. I knew immediately that it wasn't a bear, or any other animal commonly seen in these woods. I've come across countless bears, elk, and a few mountain lions as well. This thing was something different. Its body was covered in long, dark brown fur. The hairs were shorter around the head and face. And this face, it wasn't exactly ape-like, but it wasn't quite human either. It had a prominent brow and a flat nose. But those eyes, now that was the most human-like thing about it. They were wide and brown and deep, like you could tell that it was thinking. Then it stood up. It was huge, maybe 8 feet tall, and so broad through the shoulders. It was maybe half as wide as it was tall. Its arms and legs were longer than you would think, almost lanky, but powerful. I whispered under my breath, "Sasquatch." Then it charged, out of the trees and towards the deer. At the same moment, the deer bolted. At first there was about 40 yards between the deer and the creature, but it was incomprehensibly fast. For a moment it ran on 2 legs like a man. Then it dropped to all 4s, and its limbs were just a blur. I remember these details, its fur swaying and mud and grass flying up around its legs. It overcame the deer within a few seconds and reached out with his hand. I swear it was the size of a catcher's mitt, and gripped the deer by the back of its neck. It held on with these huge fingers and just flicked its wrist, like casting with a fishing rod. I heard the deer's neck snap like a matchstick. Its body convulsed for a moment as the Sasquatch lifted it from the ground with one arm. And then, I swear, it stopped and looked straight at me. I was so scared I couldn't even move. But there was this moment. And I swear I'll carry this moment with me to the end of my days. We made eye contact, and I didn't really sense any evil or even any anger in his face. He looked at me sort of like the way a wolf might look at a sheep after he's already had a good meal. There was something almost smug about his expression, as if he ruled that forest, and I was so insignificant that he could have ended my life in a second if he wanted to. And after that, he simply threw the deer over his shoulder like it was a gunny sack and walked back into the trees. I'll admit this is a crazy story, which is why I'm choosing to share it anonymously. But I will say this. I don't go fishing by myself anymore. Story 2. It stalked us. Have you ever been afraid of something you couldn't see, but you knew for sure it was there? I had that experience while camping in Silver Falls State Park, Oregon, back in 1994. The trip started off great. My 10-year-old son James and I were camping in the backcountry on our own. It was early summer and there was wildlife everywhere. Fish jumped in the creek and deer grazed in the meadows. We enjoyed the beautiful scenery, with the fern-covered rocks and mossy trees and waterfalls everywhere. For the first 3 nights, we fell asleep in our tents to the sound of owls hooting and frogs croaking, and we didn't encounter any other people. But on the 4th evening, things took a darker turn. We had just finished dinner and washing our plates. I asked James to dump the dirty water by the tree line about 100 feet from our camp. He came running back, looking wide-eyed and panicked. This surprised me because he's comfortable in the wilderness and has never really been a fearful kid. He said, "There's something in the forest watching us." "Okay, what did he look like?" I asked. "What was he wearing?" He said, "It's not a person, Dad, and it's not wearing anything. It's covered in brown fur, and it's big, and it's as thick as a tree." James clearly wasn't joking, and he was pretty shook up. "Could it be a bear?" I asked. "They look big sometimes, especially when they stand on their hind legs." He said, "Dad, I know what a bear looks like. This was no bear. It was like half man, half gorilla, and I saw its eyes. It stared at me." James was close to tears at this point. He thought he saw Bigfoot, but I was sure he'd seen some animal, and his imagination had just filled in the rest. However, when we settled down in our tent for the night, I noticed a change in our surroundings. The frogs and owls were silent. The water rushing over the boulders in the creek was the only sound to be heard. After we climbed into our sleeping bags, James calmed down a little and started asking questions about Bigfoot. So I told him the stories I'd heard about how they communicate by knocking on trees and howling from mountaintops, and the footprints people have found. My son fell asleep before too long, but I was up most of the night, just listening. But the woods remained silent. Around sunrise, I woke up to the sound of wood being knocked against a tree, and a howl. When I saw that James' sleeping bag was empty, I scrambled out of the tent, and was relieved by what I saw. It was just James, swinging a branch against the tree trunk and howling out into the woods. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm scaring away the Bigfoot that I saw. He'll hear me and think the biggest, baddest Sasquatch is in our camp, and he'll stay away." "Are you sure you aren't inviting him over to make a new friend?" I asked, half joking. "Come on, let's break camp and get ready to hike back to the car." We had just finished packing our tent when I heard a sound I'll never forget. Imagine the sound of Paul Bunyan striking a redwood tree with a giant-sized wooden bat. It was a sickening crack that sounded like a home run hit combined with a gunshot. A second later, a crash rang through the forest as a tree fell to the ground. James looked terrified all over again, and I can't say that I blamed him. We were 3 miles from the parking lot, and there was a lot of ground to cover. About a quarter mile into our hike, we were blocked by a tree lying across the trail. We looked to the left and saw where the trunk was basically shattered. The forest floor was scattered with chunks of broken wood and splinters. Needless to say, we didn't stay long. The fallen tree was just low enough for us to pull ourselves over and hurry on our way. The remaining journey was tense and silent. We didn't encounter a single animal, not one bird or chipmunk. It seemed every living thing was hiding. Neither of us felt safe until we were in the car and a mile down the road. Some people say that seeing is believing. I never literally saw a Bigfoot in those woods, but my son and I both know for certain that he's out there. Story 3. It tried to enter their house. The following is an account of one of the most famous, allegedly true Bigfoot encounters. It takes place in Fort Bragg, a forested coastal town in Northern California. When people imagine California, they tend to think of palm trees and swimming pools. But Northern California is mostly rural, and its economy is supported by logging and fishing. This part of the state has much more in common with Oregon, and cities like Los Angeles seem like another world away. In fact, the first alleged recording of Bigfoot occurred in this region. Our story begins late at night, February 7th, 1962. A logger named Robert Hatfield was visiting his sister and brother-in-law. Their dog started barking like crazy in the front yard. Hatfield went outside to see what was going on. What happened next was a terrifying chain of events. He described a giant beast that was, quote, much bigger than a bear, covered with fur, with a flat, hairless face, and perfectly round eyes. He went on to say that this creature was very tall, and that it stood chest and shoulders above a 6-foot-high fence. Hatfield rushed back into the house and woke up his brother-in-law, Bud Jenkins. Jenkins ran to grab his shotgun, and Hatfield went back outside to find the creature. He later claimed that Bigfoot shoved him to the ground, injuring his shoulder. He tried to slam the door closed as the creature tried to push its way in. Jenkins joined him, pushing the door with one hand and holding his shotgun with the other. He shouted for Hatfield to move away and prepared to shoot, but the creature disappeared just as mysteriously as it had arrived. And this is a good thing, because it turned out the shotgun was empty. The next day, the local sheriff arrived on the scene. He reported a muddy handprint on the door. The print was 11.5 inches across, with fingers the size of bananas. A search party gathered and entered the woods to find the creature, but other than a few broken branches, there was no sign of him. But the Bigfoot stories didn't end there. Hundreds of accounts from the damp, dark woods of the Pacific Northwest continue to circulate. This half-man, half-ape from the wilderness of North America was quickly reaching legendary status. If you enjoyed this content, please hit like and subscribe, and thanks for watching Storyblade.